Okay, right. Got to behave now.
Recording in progress.
I'm going to
Oh, that's
agree
it
to
now.
that.
The red light's on now.
I'm going to freeze up now.
I can't do it. All right. Should we get started on this call?
I don't. I'm very bashful, actually. I don't know. I'm very nervous when it's being recorded.
Just pretend it isn't being. You're not going live.
Yes. Okay. In a stressful situation, I always pretend that I'm naked.
You're supposed to pretend that other people are naked, aren't you?
Well, that's why I carry on being nervous.
That's it. Do you want me to take my shirt off?
What, your
Would
Bite
that...
High No Limit shirt?
Yeah, well, yes. It's funny you should mention that, Carl, because yes, I am wearing the blurry Bite High
Yeah.
No Limit shirt.
Yeah. You got the memo. You got the fashion memo. I'm not wearing mine though. Oh, it's
I've got
bad.
it, but
Mm.
automatic blurring hasn't got the memo.
Well, that's probably because they want to like obscure any trademarks on the
Exactly. Yeah.
because what we're proposing today is so big, there's going to be like rights placements and PP everywhere.
PP? Oh, goodness
PP,
me. I don't want to think about that. So yeah.
well, not BP, product placement.
Oh, right. Teletext.
This is meant to be serious, Dan. This is serious. This is a serious documentary we've worked on for two
Yes.
years.
Teletext 50. Teletext 50. Teletext 50. Teletext Peaks Demit. Peaks Desmit. That's Latvian.
Ooh,
Teletext Forfzeg. That's Luxembourgish.
all right. Oh, very good, very good. Well, labus litus to our Latvian or Lithuanian friends. Yes.
Welcome, teletexters, to the official launch of the long-awaited Teletext 50 radio documentary. Hey, proud. Thank you. Proud.
Woo!
Woo, yes. Teletext 50, The Stories, is a brand new documentary by Illiterate and Bite High No Limit Productions, who's over
Me.
there, or over
Hello.
there, or over there.
It's everywhere.
And it covers the first 50 years in the life of teletext.
Hmm.
It features 20 people, count them, 20 people that have played a role in the development, creation, and the rebirth of the blocky medium since 1974. Adapted from Carlos's smash hit podcast, it's a 1 hour, 50-minute epic guiding you through the decades by the stories of the teletext people. And guess who we have tonight? It's the aforementioned interviewer and podcast host himself, my co-presenter on Teletext Sofa Club, and for this special ball tonight, a sort of informal ball, it's Mr. Carl Astral. Hey, crowd!
Ooh, ooh. Hello.
Hello.
So, yes. Thank you, Dan. That's a lovely, lovely introduction. Yeah, that's really good.
So 2 years in the making, 2 years you've been making teletext people, and that's the main body of work that's gone into this new show. How do you feel about that? Do you feel tired? Do you feel inspired?
Do I feel? I don't feel tired. I feel really sort of well amazed, really, that it's actually we've done it. We started out doing interviews and all that with people from the teletext scene, and I always had this idea of perhaps doing something big for the 50th anniversary as a chronicle, really. And we can talk about more about that later. But yes, I mean, in an answer, I feel absolutely amazed, and I'd be quite satisfied if I don't do anything any better again.
I think you can be very proud of everything you've achieved there, Carl, because if you think of how much work you've put into this podcast and what was it, 20, 30 hours of footage you've put out, and that's not including the stuff you edited out. And that's what we've sifted through with great care for this particular podcast. We've curated the best bits that tell the story of teletext in the most coherent way possible, and lots of stories that I hadn't heard. And I don't know if that was the case for you, Carl.
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to pull you up on the fact that you said that we've gone through this. You've gone through this 30 odd hours. Um, and it's absolutely brilliant that you have because for one person to do a show and then to go through it again is somewhat marking one's own homework. So it's really good to have another view to come through. When I've obviously listened to the finished product, and it's like listening to it in a completely new way. It really is. It's and I've picked up on things, the way that the interviews are linked together in sort of like a logical fashion, where there's a lot of references in other people's interviews to things that which are being referred to in another snippet. And it's gone, in a way, a nice linear documentary, nice and logical. And I think a lot of people enjoy listening to it.
Well, I enjoyed going through everything. And well, when I say that I sifted through it, you initially sifted through it by doing your initial edit, and that's what I took the bits from. So we've both edited it, really. But yeah, for this particular edit, I was the one who sort of boiled it down to those stories.
Mhm.
So that was my role on this. It's
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
somewhat less significant than Carl's, but it should be acknowledged, I think.
Mm, absolutely. And it wouldn't have been here had it not been for your bits, put tying a bow around it and smacking it on the bottom as they might say in the trade. But no, I've really enjoyed it and the way that we've come across sort of like curating and linking the clips up together and but by use of other sort of like audio devices as well, just to keep the listener included, so they don't have to listen to this all the time from me.
Yeah, we have some music from Pixel Blip.
Hmm.
Yeah, Blippy Pixel 1, you might know him as. He's the teletext master, but he's also a musical master. And a lot of the songs that we've got in here, the covers that he's done, are from British artists, which is quite fitting, I think, because this tells the British story, the UK-centric side of things.
Hmm.
Although it does include some bits about how teletext migrated abroad into America and Russia. Well, speaking of which, well, first of all, I should say that tonight this is the official launch, which means you can now find and listen to the documentary itself. It's officially released via Byte High No Limit on the Podbean, which is linked down in the description. And the documentary is split into three acts. The first being the development of teletext in the 70s and the 80s. The second is the medium's heyday, 90s and 2000. And the third is everything that has happened post digital switchover in 2012. But Carl, I think we should just give people a taste of who's on the podcast. We mentioned we started from the beginning and worked our way to the end. We began with Mort Smith, Mort and Julie Smith, actually, along with Ian Irving in the introductory part, where you talk about the very early days of teletext and the teething problems, which in hindsight were quite hilarious. I'm sure they didn't seem so at the time, but listening to them as stories, they're so wonderful, particularly Esmeralda.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
you actually visited Mort, didn't you? It was an on-location interview.
yeah, yeah. It was, and it's quite fitting because that was the first ever Teletext People recording that I did for the podcast, and I visited Julie and More where they lived, and it was really nice. It was like just done on a little a voice recorder on the table, and spent hours there. They showed me loads of clip-ins, and we went through an awful lot of talking points and many subjects, and it was really really entertaining, and it was written in the stars because I went back and obviously did an edit on that, and it was from that I managed to speak to other teletext people because of the names that were dropped in that. So it was like being a bit of a sleuth, really. it was good. It was like the genesis of it all, and also quite fitting with the his and Ian's position of being the first employees of Colin McIntyre.
Yeah, that's a good point because we've got some Colin McIntyre in this documentary. Unfortunately, he's not around these days for us to physically interview him, having passed in 2012, actually, which was the same year that CFAX ended. Colin is in this because I felt that, well, I put a documentary clip in of him,
Hmm.
an archive clip, because I think he deserved to be in there. His voice needs to be in the story.
What was the initial response that you discovered when you were actually trying to sell the idea to other people?
Well, I suppose a lot of people really did scoff. They said, oh, just as another engineer's solution looking for a problem. And there was certainly, at the beginning we had sort of two viewers, and I used to ring them both up on the telephone and find out how they're getting on. But eventually, sets began to be made, and it began to move.
It was really good the way you included Colin McIntyre because he had a sort of a demure about him, which was sort of like, I don't know, we're talking about this obviously from a very British uh, perspective, but he sounded very much like, we just carried on. You can imagine, he must have knew what the matter was with Esmeralda because he just had that spirit of, well, you just give it a kick, don't you? And it just
Yeah.
keeps going, doesn't it? But also, I won't spoil it for the listeners, but there, he was ahead of his time. He was constantly a visionary.
Yeah, in the full Teletext People episode with Mort, Colin McIntyre gets brought up quite a lot. In fact, a lot of people throughout the Teletext 50 series, Teletext People series, mentioned Colin McIntyre, and
Mm.
we've referred to him as Mr. CFAX because he was sort of the one that started it all. What would you have asked Colin McIntyre if you could have interviewed him for Teletext People?
Oh, crikey, that's a really good question.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, 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 that's fine. That's fine. I would have probably, I, I think we'd probably ask him, what did he want to get on the service, that he couldn't manage in the end. And if I was asking him, obviously now with what technology there is around now, I'd ask him, how much of this would have actually existed without CFAX. And because I think really without the CFAX, it wouldn't have got the country ready for the web the way it did and technology the way it did.
Well, there is a big thread running through the second and third parts of this documentary where teletext coexists and then sort of fades away due to the presence of the web. And without wanting to give too much away, we've got contributions from, in particular, Graham Lovelace. So I think this is the second longest or second biggest chunk that we've got after Mort Smith in this documentary. I feel like those two particular episodes of Teletext People, Mort and Graham Lovelace, were the most enlightening for me personally. They were straight from the horse's mouth. They were the people who were there at the time making those changes, and they remember it so vividly. Again, without wanting to give away too much, it's a whole story with its ups and downs that could be literally a movie. The way that they tell it, it's funny, it's moving, it's everything all rolled into one.
Mm, mm. And also with the fact that they're very skilled journalists, it was easy for me just to sit back and just let them tell me all about it. They self-edited themselves because they were so good in telling me the story in a very sort of like logical way, in a very linear way, and it was absolutely wonderful. Graham's account of his time running the teletext with a capital T service that took over Oracle was one which might surprise some people who were, I don't know, probably the last memory they had of Oracle going away was how bad they thought Teletext was because it had to be a little bit different. And Graham goes 100% into justifying all the challenges that he had, And also, something that surprised me about the interview as well is how responsive they were as a company to people who were ringing in, saying that this page isn't here, that page isn't there. I didn't realise, but his brief was actually to contact each and every one of those people to actually get their feedback, because that was part of the charter of them winning the contract.
People looked at teletext as this life support, as a friend, as a companion, and we started to think, okay, let's really drill into this. So I had this idea that we would create viewer groups around the country, and that we would actually reach out to these people, and they would become people that would provide feedback, but we'd actually give them a membership of something, and there'd be a community of people. And we had about, I think at one stage, about 10 of these. At one meeting, we had hundreds of people in the room.
So yeah, there was a lot in there, and very, very moving towards the end in the original edit on the Teletext people, and again, a lot of that has come over onto the documentary.
The way that Mort talks about things and the way that Graham talks about things, you can see how teletext has moved on from the 70s to the 90s, where all of a sudden it's this big concern, it's commercial. Whereas at the beginning, there was the spirit of the Wild West and the spirit of the startup. Whereas you get 20 years into the future, 30 years into the future, and there's so much pressure on making this thing sell, getting teletext holidays on there, getting, all these different sources to pump money into teletext to keep it going. And Graham puts across that pressure very well in his interview. All the different things that they had to think about and all the different challenges they had to face. Yeah, it was brilliant, I thought.
Well, it also raises many different parallels to what happens with any startup, whether that be e-cigarettes or Twitter, because you're looking at something that starts up where you've got sort of like co-collaborative and people wanting it to do well. Then you have the time when it becomes sort of like the main thing and a cultural phenomenon where everyone's enjoying it. And then towards the end, where you get the linchpins that actually leave the service because it's being monetized to the nth degree, or being sort of like, treated as a cash cow. That's where our people leave the story of teletext because it just becomes too much for them. I think in both cases, to be fair.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to actually describe the whole documentary. It's sliding doors, isn't it? Some come in, some move out, but they never forget about the time at Teletext. And that really comes across in all of the stories that everybody tells. They all remember the time working for and with around Teletext so fondly. And I think that's why this Teletext people in this documentary work so well. Yeah, there's that sort of enthusiasm, even when it's just the job to some of the people. It never is it? Because like where Sarah Scott Rivers said that she sees things in Paperchase that are little squares that are teletext and pixel art inspired. And she says, oh, you could never make that really with teletext. And her husband says, oh, really, Sarah, you need to get over yourself.
It's probably one of my favorite bits in that, because I think my missus probably says that to me when I'm on Audacity half an evening trying to cut a sentence out somewhere.
Well, as teletext ours, we can all relate to that, can't we? Because we're always saying, oh, that new McDonald's advert, that's not real teletext, is it?
Oh, well, more recently, the Scotland Squad being released as well. Yeah, that was a rather awful attempt at it as well.
And Tim Burgess recently as well from the Charlatans has been making his own mock-ups of teletext screens of his band #1 in the charts, in the indie charts.
Oh, right.
That's been good.
If only they could use some of Alistair's teletext editors or something like that. That'd make a better fist of it, because obviously we interviewed those people as well. We interviewed a lot of people that perhaps some listeners might know well, because obviously we're in cahoots with them an awful lot of the time. But to the listening public, which I hope that this documentary goes out to, as a broader thing, it gives people an introduction into characters like Jason Robertson, Alistair Cree, Nathan Dane, because that will give them an idea of obviously what comes after the Cultural Revolution that Teletext started. It then gets goes into hiatus, and then these people come and sort of bring it back, and it never leaves the consciousness. So that's why it's quite good to have like people archiving the pages and all that. How is that done? And how do people do it? Well, it's all in the documentary as well, but not too much in the way of sort of like super geek stuff. It really is a casual listen, and then further reading can be done elsewhere. But I think we've tried to keep it as something that anybody can have on in the car and learn from, and not have to sort of like do any long division or anything like that, or look anything up on the internet. We tried to keep everything as jargon free as possible as well, which our journalists are really good at, because obviously they're used to speaking to Joe and Josephine public. But when you speak to specialists like ourselves, we have to sort of like self-edit and perhaps moderate the way that we talk sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's something that's a little bit different between Teletext Sofa Club, the stream that we do here, and the Teletext 50 Teletext People project, where it's sort of more for everybody. And that's something that definitely we've kept in mind when editing. Hopefully, those who are less familiar with Teletext can understand some of the little technical bits we throw in now and again. Like we go to right at the end, we go to the ZXNet editor by Alistair. When we talk about level 2 teletext, I hope people understand that that's what people were trying to improve on teletext in the 80s and 90s. That had to be in there somewhere, I think. And the same with teletext holidays as well, but that's for a different reason.
Yeah, so the test that I wanted to do on the whole thing really was some podcasts, when you're listening to them not on your earpods and you're listening to them in a room, if someone else walks in a room and you pause it because you know that it's not for them, and then you resume it when they're gone, that is not what this podcast is. This podcast you can leave rolling on. Hopefully it's something that that everybody can listen to, whether like the person that walks in the room is interested in it or not, I don't know. But it's not silly, it's not stupid, it's a really sort of like a genuine documentary, I think. So that's a little test that I try and apply to it. I don't know if you're like me at all, but if you're watching a stream or something like that and someone else walks in and goes, that's a bit silly, you think, oh right, well that's a normal person that's walked in there. That's what it actually is. So that's what that's the raison d'etre of the of the documentary. It's all things to all people. You never know, someone at Channel 5 who's a bit lazy might actually listen to it and go, oh, actually we'll base some of our findings on these recollections and experiences rather than the people that do the McDonald's advert. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's it. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. BBC Radio 4, BBC 4 on TV. Is it still going, BBC 4? I thought they ended it.
It is, yeah,
But
yeah.
that sort of is what you had in mind, isn't it?
Yes. And the style as well was very much not having a narrator. Old styles of documentaries where you had a narrator talking through it, or a wildlife documentary, where someone's going, oh, this mouse is very busy. It's going off to have something to eat now and all that. And you can see that they're trying to do all the heavy lifting themselves. That's not needed in a documentary like this. We introduce people just so that the listener's familiar with the person that's speaking, and perhaps we can tie a few things together. But the guests have been so wonderful, because they didn't know that there was going to be one big arch documentary, but they have done a lot of the work for us, with the way they mention things. And one of my favourite things in the whole documentary comes right at the beginning, where you had the two different accounts of people getting employed by Colin McIntyre, which I found really fascinating. They just work so well together.
Yeah, I think that's the only time in Teletext 50 where two people recall the same event specifically, because they had the same experience. And you get close to that sort of with John Earls and Paul Rose, where they talk about the rise of the internet, and they have an overlapping opinion that teletext bet the farm.
There's 1,000,001 stories and 1,000,001 different takes about why teletext didn't go online, didn't make best use of digital technology as it could have done. My own particular take on that is that effectively teletext gambled on digital TV. It was almost like a red or black choice between digital TV and the internet, and teletext bet the farm on digital. And in retrospect, that was of course the wrong choice.
Yeah.
They bet the farm on the wrong thing.
Yes.
And the internet, like Paul says, oh, I thought it was just a thing for nerds and geeks. But yeah, I thought
How
that was
ironic.
very appropriate. Yeah, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. And that was good. Yeah, John Earls was obviously a very interesting part to cover the cultural phenomenon with teletext. Obviously, Paul Rose with the digitizer side, and how much fun it was to be working there. And then obviously Ian Westbrook with the more the BBC Sports side, which is something which is a halfway house. It's between the people who sort of like wouldn't quite do computer games but did the news, So the stories that came out from him about CFAX was really interesting, and also we got a flavour of how people felt they were placed in the in the organisation when they worked at CFAX. Falling between two stools, maybe not quite being journalists from the journalist point of view, but they actually were, and I think Ian articulated it quite succinctly when he was. Well, there were stories there that he comes up with where he came up in direct confrontation, I guess, with the linear broadcast side of the sports, because the technology was perhaps getting a little bit too far ahead of itself.
Yeah, I thought Ian had some, as you said, he had some very good stories about when he was working at CFAX and the physical challenges of that. There's a clip where he mentioned they had a particular protocol when covering the golf at the Open tournament.
One year I was at the Open Golf and a player accused us of misquoting him. I won't name the player, but what used to happen was they'd hold press conferences for some of the players, particularly in the last couple of days, but they couldn't do it for everybody. So what used to happen was that the officials would interview certain players at the end of their rounds rather than having a press conference and print out the quotes and put them in a tray at the back of the press tent. You could just go and get a copy, whichever ones you needed. So we wrote up quotes to this particular player. I think he said something like, disappointed he finished and he was going to take a rest and not play in the next week's tournament. Anyway, half an hour after we published the story, there's a tannoy announcement saying, "Somebody from CFAX come to the front desk, please." So I went to the desk and this player's agent was standing there and he said, "Look, he's read your piece, he's very unhappy, that's not what he said at all." So I brought the guy over to our desk and handed him the printout and said, "Well, he did say this, here's what he said, and we've correctly quoted him word for word." And Beck apologised because his player had misinformed him and we hadn't done anything wrong at all.
But again, that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, you misquote someone there on Twitter, no one gives two hoots, do they?
Oh yeah,
but on CFAX, it was important, and that was the thing, and although you couldn't have, unless you printed out CFAX, which no one ever did, would it really matter if you're misquoted? But it was a big deal, it was the only way people got their news, and if they read it on that, they trusted it. So there's a lot to be said for that. So so we've got obviously, when we go worldwide, Mort tells us a little bit about going to America and where they adopt British technology. In the dawn of the relationship with Reagan and Thatcher, obviously, we started giving them a bit of teletext. And there were some really interesting stories on how teletext actually did feature quite strongly on some TV networks over in the US, to the point that when we speak to some of our USA listeners and correspondents, some of them weren't aware of the fact that it had such a footprint, and then others come and tell us that we hadn't even touched the tip of the iceberg. There was at least 3 or 4 other services. So there's still perhaps a lot more, like perhaps in an international investigation, we can find out more about that. But then we go to the other side. In a span of another 5 or 6 years, We then go to the east, the collapse of the Soviet Union. What's the first thing they want? Teletexty. They want a bit of teletext. And who's our man to do that? No more than the BBC Moscow editor, Steve Rosenberg. And that was a real proud moment of mine to actually to be able to speak to Steve for to recount his recollections of starting Russia's first ever teletext service. And again, a strange Englishman sitting in a broadcast tower in Moscow, and that really is a must listen as well.
Yeah, to an English or British listener, we don't really get a lot of foreign speaking media, or we're not really in touch with what's happening sort of past Germany or that sort of side of Europe, because it doesn't get imported. So we kind of know about teletext in Germany, France, Netherlands, places like that, Italy, but you wouldn't guess sort of those Hungarian teletext. There was Hebrew teletext, wasn't there, as well? The Hebrew character set, which Alistair was looking into. And of course, the Russian teletext, which is the most fascinating of all, because it's a story that I doubt has ever been told in English language up until this point. I'm going to pick something out. The exploding Soviet televisions. Before sort of Western teletext sets or Western TV sets got imported back in the Soviet Union days, I guess they were of a lower standard, these televisions, and they were a leading cause of house fires.
Do you know, in Soviet times, of course, there were no teletext decoders in Soviet television sets, which tended to explode. I think exploding television sets was one of the main causes of house fires. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, then you had Western electronics coming into Russia big time. So eventually, yes, televisions with teletext decoders were on the market.
Little things like that you would never know unless you actually lived over there, would you?
No, that's right. A lot of parts were embargoed that they could they couldn't get, like a lot of the microchips and things like that. So the technology that they were using was proven technology, but perhaps a little bit behind the times. And I guess the exploding television was a cause of a house fire until these sets that came over from mainland Europe, the Western bloc of Europe, if you like, with the Philips sets with the teletext chips started coming in, and that's when they decided that there was a need for a teletext service to pump into it. But that was, I think, from what Steve was explaining, it was funded a lot by the European Union, and he, with his knowledge, obviously, of Russian, he did a Cyrillic service, a pure Russian service. He did an English service, and I think he'd done a different service, maybe in a different language, but you'd have to check the documentary for that because I can't remember.
So Steve Rosenberg, he's currently at the BBC. He's a Russia correspondent, isn't he? But
Russia editor,
again, he fondly remembers his time working for teletext. All these people seem to really have a fondness. So who haven't we talked about so far?
Okay.
We've got, I think one thing that is probably underrepresented on the internet is information about the history of Oracle. There's a lot about CFAX and the development of that, because they've published a load of documents early on that you can find. And obviously the people are around on Facebook. But something that's very underdocumented, I feel, is Oracle. Now, we've got a representative here who was responsible for Debbie's Diary, Gareth Herrinks, who actually later worked at the BBC, but he started his teletext life at Oracle. There's a story in there, isn't there, about how this caused a bit of a scandal. I often go back to the Teletext in Europe book by Halvard Moe. At the start, it says, well, the rationale or the summing up of teletext is, it was very uncontroversial. But I think some of the moments in this documentary prove that it had the potential to be very controversial. And you've got the divergence in thought over what should happen with Debbie's Diary.
Yeah. So they ran a feature called Debbie's Diary that Gareth was heavily involved with, and it was getting quite popular. People were looking out for it to be coming out every time of the day that it did on his magazine, they received a letter of complaint. I think it was via the DTI or the Ofcom of the day. It's a regulator we have in the UK, and they upheld a complaint by somebody who was very upset about the content in Debbie's diary. And he has the letter. He reads the letter out, and we think, crikey, was that enough to for them to get a real stern slap on the wrists? And to change the time that Debbie's diary could be released, so that perhaps the audience that it was actually meant for were unable perhaps to read it, because it was going to have to come out later in the evening. There was also another letter that he received in defence of it as well, and but again, it goes to show, to demonstrate to anybody that are these things of not controversial. They moved people to write letters in to complain, which means they were reading what was actually put in the thing. Now, you and I would read Debbie's diary and we wouldn't bat an eyelid, to be fair. But you got to think, at the time that was being released in the mid to late 80s, there were still a lot of, I don't know, should we say, sort of like people, quite moralistic people there, that felt that that what was coming through the television was some way subversive to people, and that that young girls could read this and fall pregnant just by pressing the reveal button or something like that. So but Gareth was an excellent contributor as well, because he ate, slept and breathed teletext. Again, a vocation, something that runs all the way through this. It's not like some people do jobs for the money, and yes, money's very important, but these people do this because it's a new thing and it's an interesting thing, and with what they put into it, they make something so interesting, and it's a big part of their life. I mean, I think Gareth sort of like got found his other half through teletext as well. I think they're all working together. So it goes to show sort of what a close-knit family they were there. So it was a really interesting account. I really enjoyed having get Gareth telling us in the documentary about things in teletext. And he's still in journalism, and like a lot of these people as well, Ian and Gareth are still in journalism. Obviously, Steve Rosenberg is doing rather well. If not, he has to be fairly careful in Moscow. But his reporting from the Russian capital is absolutely mind blowing. There's wonderful perspectives that he puts things on things, and he does reports as well on Twitter. Like just short videos and teletext training. Again, unfortunately, regular listeners will know that we talk about how succinct teletext has to be, and that skill, something that I haven't got. They can get a point across very quickly in a punchy way.
Yeah, a few people mentioned that. We've got Mort, who says it's very good training. And of course, well, it bookends the documentary, really. Mort says that at the beginning, it's good journalistic training, really, because you have to get everything into the first paragraph. And that is translated very well to online, where if you think about it, really, the way things are formatted is very much like, especially on the BBC website, it is the same as a teletext page. You've got your introductory sentence in bold, which on teletext would be cyan, and then everything else is sort of one sentence paragraphs, which would fit into teletext pages. And then at the very end, we've got Binface, who's one of the biggest champions of teletext in the modern day.
Yes.
And he brings that point up again, that we've moved away from that now with social media.
Yes, it's all conjecture and fluff now to fill in the bits, to keep people on the page, to keep people clicking links and things like that, and it he does he says exactly the same point. It makes exactly the same points as a lot of our contributors do who actually worked in the service. I do wonder if Count Binface actually worked in his local teletext service in his own planet of Sigma 9.
His Galaxy.
Galaxy, yes, that's right. Yeah. So he certainly took me to task in that interview. He's it was very, very good. very good.
Yeah, he's a really funny guy. I really enjoyed that episode of Teletext People.
Mm.
And he actually gets, well, he doesn't get the last word, but he's the most modern. He brings us up to date with the documentary. He's sort of near the end,
Mhm.
but with his campaign, recently passed campaign to be the London mayor.
And
So-
probably a future one as we speak.
Yeah, well, yeah. Without wanting to date this. Well, it is Teletext 50, isn't it?
Teletext
So
50, yeah.
it's general election year, we'll put it
yes.
that way. And Teletext
Mm.
covered many elections
Mm.
over the years.
Definitely, and which is something that our one of our special newest followers to the teletext movement, James Domestic, articulated perfectly in his poem that he did for us.
Through the latter half of the Cold War, through Wilson, Callaghan and Thatcher, Major Blair, Cameron and Brown, the Eurostar, Diana. But its days were sadly numbered with the rise of the World Wide Web, which gave Ceefax a wedgie Chinese burn and bloody neb. This town's too small for both of us. Ceefax, you must be shelved. Ceefax knew the web had won and skulked off in 2012. Is it merely the pull of nostalgia, the ache of an old man's heart, hankering for the relics of youth, the deceit of a rose-tinted past?
Callaghan, Blair, Brown, and Thatcher. And teletext was going right way through on them and the election coverage that it used to provide. So and the election, the teletext graphics that the election coverage that used to rely on as well. So there's a few things in that culturally. So again, it goes to show what a cultural phenomenon teletext is. That we're talking about it now. There will be people that will listen to this documentary in interest.
Yeah, well, I hope in the documentary we've covered all the major things that Teletext was known for. I think the only thing that's missing is Bamboozle. There's no mention or any section about Bamboozle, but I think most of the other important things, that Barney's Bunch is not in there.
Mm-hmm.
But as it was, we kind of struggled to get it down to 1 hour and 50 minutes. Originally, we wanted an hour, but then I thought, that's not going to be enough because you've got the story of Teletext when it was on our screens and then a totally separate story afterwards. I mean, if you wanted, you could listen to this in 3 parts. Yeah, the first part, 70s and 80s, as I mentioned at the start, the heyday and then the death, following Teletext's death.
Well, we could do that on the CD version.
Yeah.
We could do 3 CDs, I think, and split it up. We might want to do something like that where we could perhaps, for the Teletext 50 party in Cambridge, that we might be able to knock up some sort of special edition or something like that if people would be care enough to massage my vanity.
How many cassette tapes would that fit on 1 hour and 50?
Well, yeah, so you got C90 cassettes. You could C90 is probably the most prevalent type you can get. You could get thicker ones, but the tape gets thinner on it. Is that 195 minutes then? Is it something like that?
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, and you got to figure out where to turn the tape over as well.
No.
It'd be like that dual case cassette, where you get the 2 tapes in the one, like in the old computer games.
Yeah.
Maybe you could do it on that. But it's one of them. I'd like to do a physical thing with it, and have like a teletext cover and all that. So but hey, that's running before we walk. I'd just like it if people would just go there and listen to it and enjoy it. It's been absolutely, a wonderful thing to work on and to work with. And I was sitting there the other morning thinking, crikey, we did miss Bamboozle, we did miss Barney's Bunch, but it's not through the want of trying. A lot of people with Bamboozle, it is still a IP, I think, as well, isn't it? It still belongs to somebody, I think. Is that right?
I believe so. DMG Media, which is, Daily Mail, the same people actually who took over Teletext Limited. Took over from Oracle in the 90s. They still own those IPs.
Yeah, so it went through the want of trying of getting some Bamboozle and some other material, but it's not always easy. I mean, I did try and reach out to a few people that worked at Teletext Holidays, and I got some people that came back to me kindly and said, I don't think I could really tell you anything. It was just a job.
Okay.
But that's interesting because to those people on the teletext holidays that I spoke to, I didn't speak to everybody, obviously, but the people that came back, to them, it was just a job. Everybody that we have spoken to for the documentary, it was more than a job to them. It was a vocation. So make it out of what you will. It's sort of like it could be that, on the monetized side, it was really, nose to the grindstone. We're doing this as a 9 to 5. We're on the clock and we're buggering off down the pub at 5. And then, the people that have fond memories of it are the people that were emotionally invested in it, doing a job that obviously wasn't just selling.
Well, we do have a section about teletext holidays, and I think this is quite interesting and funny section because we have some people who did have dealings with teletext holidays, and they are really good contributions. And it's the only time in the documentary when I strayed from teletext people. It's the only clip that we've taken from one of our live streams. It's Steve Horsley. We've not brought him up yet tonight. Horsenberger is absolute legend in teletext art in present day. Worked for Teletext Limited in the 90s, but he also worked drawing balls and horses for the companies that advertised on Teletext Limited. So that's a really good story. I know you have to listen to the documentary to find out what that is, but yeah, I'm glad that turned, because it addresses also with Graham Lovelace some of the major questions that he got about why it took so long for the carousel to spin around. So that's answered. And it feels like, do you remember the bit from Peter Kay when his act in the 2000s, and he had like a whole bit about teletext saying, "Oh, take them matchsticks out your eyes. Come on, it's coming round. Oh, it's gone now. It's sold." So I feel like, Graham was directly responding to Peter Kay, which is really good. And we actually have a couple of cheeky clips of Peter Kay and fair use because he's commenting on them. Is Mr. Lovelace? Yeah.
That's it. Definitely.
That's another thing about this documentary as well, isn't it? It's how we describe it. Is it public domain, would you say?
Well, yeah, I would say
doco.
Yeah, it is. It's public domain. It's it's people's account of working for a service that no longer exists, and it's an account, it's a chronicle really of people that work there. I mean, there's no right or wrong about it. If we, obviously there are facts in there and stuff like that, but people's recollections are people's recollections, aren't they? If they went in there and they think that, it was 16 floors high and it was only 12, it doesn't matter, because it's how they felt about it at the time. So that's what we're trying to do. But it's public domain really, isn't it? It's not we've done this out of our own time and our own effort. It's not a Kickstarter, it's not a crowd-funded thing in any way at all. It's something that we wanted to make because we felt that it had to be made. And that goes back again to teletext. I think, journals said that try and explain teletext to an American. You get this information, you just press this button and it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah. Well, the American teletext is very different, isn't it? It's made with the titlers, the video titlers, and it's usually about weather and emergency announcements and people's birthdays and things like that. It's kind of like teletext, but our teletext, but not the same.
Yeah, it's sort of like a public information thing, which I guess ours was as well. But I don't know. I mean, when Mort was talking about, obviously it was used as a device to promote other verticals going through the same TV business. It was like we can have teletext on, and the development of the rolling carousel, which came back to the UK because it was developed in America, was really so that you didn't turn over from that TV station to find something else. It kept people from moving that dial, as you'd say, because it'd take effort to move it back again. That's part of the reason for it. So it's quite an interesting thing, and there's a lot of technical reasons why it didn't obviously take off in America, but it's not through the want of trying, and also it wasn't right. I think they only had a couple of TV manufacturers that were using the Teletext chips, Zenith, which was mentioned in the documentary, and I think a few sort of like rebadged Philips products got over there as well. And obviously market share is going to, put pay to that for the amount of money that it costs to get it going.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of competing forces in America. It's different. Whereas, and I'm thinking about Minitel as well in France. If it's backed by a public, say, broadcaster, or like, was it the French
The
post?
French government, yeah,
French
it's the
book, that's
French
it. Yeah, I should know that. I've got the Minitel book. But like here, we had the BBC backing it and pumping money into it. And then it quickly became this commercial thing.
Yeah.
They never had that nationwide backing because it's such a big country, and you've got all those individual states are sort of akin to one country in Europe. So you could control, say, a state and say a statewide thing, but it might work in New York, but it might not work down in Texas. So
Yes.
for different completely different reasons.
Well, also with the broadcasting set up there as well, and that was only when I listened back and I re-listened to what Mort was telling me in the interview, was that a lot of the US setup was cable for a start, so national syndication was cable, but the local one would be sort of like an analog broadcast. So that's where we go back to slightly converging our universes here. But you're going to Chicago, you had an analog service which a lot of local cities had, so that's where your teletext service would have come from.
Keyfax, the service in Chicago was called Keyfax, obviously a steal from CFAX. It was a UHF TV station, which basically every city has at least one or two of these UHF TV stations. But because of the tie-in with the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper, basically they had that as a mechanism to publicise the fact that they were offering teletext. And they did a deal with Zenith Television.
Although I think they pronounced it Zenith.
Zenith, that's right. And they started making teletext-equipped televisions.
So it was all down to the success or the how good the analog service was. So that's why you had 4 different services. I think up to 4 different services in the US. But not a lot of people know about it, because if you lived in Chicago, you only knew about the Chicago one, and if you lived up in I think the other one was, I think that was Seattle or somewhere like that, and then it was sort of miles away. I mean, to the likes of you and I, I'll drive up to Wigan. That'll be like what, 5 hours and 40 minutes for me. I mean, that gets you to the end of the drive in America.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big place. I think that's probably one of the reasons why it never took off. And internet, and it's an invading technology as well. It's always a bit harder when it's not homegrown as well. If you look at a lot of the music stars that were big in this country but never quite reached that sort of superstardom in America, they just had the one hit wonders. But like over here, they're massive. So many of those. It's difficult, isn't it, when you're trying to, get over there and do that.
Of course, your local news for Chicago is going to be like your national news
in the UK,
coverage, broadcast coverage. So so like if you're trying to do like you're going to go, well, teletext is really good because it's local and it's local information. They're still having to give like 50 different temperatures out for the local weather, because it's so blimmin' big. Unless you had like very sort of like meta stations that could run it off, very much like we don't cover it so much, but obviously in Germany. You've got the Ersten program, and that covers ARD, but they do have syndicated local teletext services that work off their local transmitters and all that. But that is for another day, because obviously that is the Teletext Loiter documentary that we might do for celebrating Funzigliara of the teletext at some point for them. But I think we would be the people who knew the least about it because
Nah.
we're not von Deutschland. So yeah,
You know, we could try to do something for that, like a half an hour show. We could
yeah, that'd be
try
quite
and
good.
get in
Yeah, could
touch
do
with a
that.
couple of people. But
Yeah.
speaking of which, I think
Hmm.
something else that could be its own show, from my own perspective, is teletext art and the
Yes.
development of it. But
Mhm.
obviously, I'm very biased there, but we do have a section about teletext art in this, including probably one of the fathers of teletext art, Paul B. Davis.
Yes, the very
who-
reason I got into teletext in the first place.
And it's more about him being a facilitator
Yes.
than an artist. There's a lot to be said for that, I think, for introducing teletext to people and showing people how they can use things and then spreading that vibe, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
And-
I found him to be the accidental genesis of it all. He didn't realise, did he?
Well, no, if you speak to a lot of the modern day teletext artists, they will mention that project. Yeah, and some of them took part in that project. But you've got people like Raquel Myers, who's not in this documentary, unfortunately. We need to actually do an interview with her, don't we? Maybe we're going to do in another 5 years a teletext art documentary. I mean, we've got enough stuff now with the sofa clubs and the teletext arts. So maybe that's something for me in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just for Teletext 50, we have this little section about teletext art and about how it developed alongside the main tech as well, I see it as a sort of rebellious thing. I don't know if I say that in the documentary. There are clips from me, but I don't think that made it in about how it's quirky, but also it feels very rebellious. And
Counterculture, I think, isn't it? So yeah.
Paul B. Davis mentions that he learned, this is not in the documentary, but he learned about teletext from Dragan Espenscheid, who actually did take part in the Microtel project, Paul B. Davis's project. And yeah, he was fascinated by it, about how...
I think the exact quotation was, teletext, what the fuck?
That's it. Yeah, yeah. I think that's why it stood out in my mind. But that is a lot of people's reaction, though, to seeing teletext art. But you can make art with teletext. Either that or, oh yeah, I remember Digitizer and the clever artworks on there. So yeah, there's that's represented in there. Have we covered most of the other sections as well?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Have we missed anybody out on the list?
We've got Ricardo Autobahn from the
Right,
Cuban
yeah.
Boys. He's in there because he got his start on teletext, and they're all good stories, but this is such a good story about how he hacked teletext and found a way to send out loads of spam emails via a special program to fool Planet Sound into thinking all these people were talking about his little band that hadn't performed anywhere. It was sort of an in-joke, and they had one song that they put together that they were going to release, and they got played on John Peel because of it. And it's an incredible story, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
How they've manipulated teletext into used this thing, and how important it was before the internet developed was this huge thing. And you could go viral on it, like you go viral now on TikTok. Back then, he was going viral on teletext, and it was so clever how he manipulated it to become a chart. Did they get to number one?
Oh, they got to. They get to number 4. I can't remember now. The year
Hamster
2000.
Dance.
Yeah, Hamster Dance. Yeah.
And then he went on from that to do a Eurovision track.
Yes.
And these days he can be regularly seen, Ricardo Autobahn, with Hackety Dog. He has a close relationship with the
very
CBC,
close relationship
with the CBBC star Hacker the Dog. Yeah, the puppets.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, and also the serial number of his first single, I think, is actually referencing the first editor of Planet Sound as well. And he made it a requirement when he was speaking to the record label, that his first interview's got to be with teletext, and they're going, "What? Okay, yeah, whatever." So yeah, it was really it made a big part in it, a big part in his life that he really enjoys talking about and recounting tales of, and it's sort of Yeah, they were the biggest pop stars I interviewed for that, and you know, he keeps in close touch now, and hopefully we'll be able to do something for the teletext thing coming up soon. So
That's right.
we shall see. Hopefully, if that all comes off, that will be that'd be sort of super, really. If that does, be a good synergy of everything all coming together.
That was great because it was an interview out of left field because it's something that lots of people might forget, or it was a very niche thing that you wouldn't know. Sort of, he's the guy who did Hamster Dance, but you wouldn't know that he got his start on teletext. He became popular because of teletext.
Our campaign was based around the teletext mainly. We based the entire Cuban Boys ethos around writing a load of fake letters to Planet Sound under various names. We worked out how to trick the computer into sending emails with various different responses so that you could fake your identity, as it were. So every day we'd send umpteen emails saying, oh, we heard this great song on John Peel. Oh, has anybody heard about the Cuban Boys? Oh, somebody's been at school has been talking about the Cuban Boys, and so on and so forth. And every day one would get printed, or every couple of days, and it snowballed into this mental sort of chaos whereby Stephen knew what was going on, I believe, fairly soon each week that we were gaming the system. And he got us on to do a full kind of interview thing, despite the fact we'd not released any records, and all we were really doing was sending CDs to John Peel, who was playing them happily.
So that is one of the major things about this documentary. You're and teletext people, you're dredging up these stories that have been forgotten or are unknown, and that's what it is. It's the people's stories. We've covered lots of them, but there are so many more out there waiting to be uncovered, and they all surround teletext. And that it's like lost media in a way. People don't know about it. They're out there waiting for people to say, hey, I did this. Hey, let's make a pop record.
Well, it's interesting because we shared the James Domestic poem we converted over into a video as a way of a thank you to James to, you know, help him along and publicize things. And I shared it to the Facebook page, and then James shared it to his own media. And then one of the comments came up to him saying, I never knew you were into teletext. A friend of mine used to do a page called Digitizer. There you go. Ah, right. Okay. Who are you then? You know, he's used to work with him, at Digitizer, or knew him or something like that. So, but yeah, it's, you know, that you know, nothing will come of that probably, but it goes to show that there's people that have this like 1 degree of separation to the people that you think. And again, this takes me right the way back to the first interview with Mort Smith, where he said, oh, a young chap called Steve Rosenberg came into CFAX office in 1980. He was interested in Russian, and he did some work experience covering the Moscow Olympics. So you needed CFAX, you needed the Moscow Olympics, you know, for Steve Rosenberg to come up. And who knows, you know, would you be, you know, would it be really out of the blue to suggest that, you know, without Steve, you know, going to CFAX and covering the Moscow 80 Olympics on that, that, you know, his career wouldn't have gone another way, you know. Sliding doors, you've said it already, but yeah, it is fascinating. So but yeah, just hope that people really enjoy it. And you know, the documentary's less than 2 hours we got it to?
It is, yeah.
So it's you know, you can listen to that in a few car journeys. And yeah, it's just like I said at the beginning, you know, thank you so much for helping, Dan. And I just feel that like I say, if I don't do anything else now, I'm happy. You know, it's done. I mean, I'll keep making podcasts about obscure things, interesting things, and all that. And you know, I won't hit the heady heights of anybody on BBC Sounds or anything like that. But it's just so satisfying to make these to make these shows. But you know, knowing that this one's going to be out there, yeah, that you know, I'm really proud of it. Really proud of it.
I think you should be proud of the work you've done on this documentary and teletext people, because it's an untold story by and large. it brings all of the, it's the first time all these different people have been brought together for one big documentary about teletext. Because the BBC have never done like a large scale retrospective on teletext. And we're coming up to the 50th anniversary and nothing's been announced yet.
No.
But until then, we've got Teletext 50. And who knows, Carl, I think there's going to be a Teletext 60 as well. We're going to do a Teletext, but yeah, who knows who's going to be in that? It could be somebody watching this right now.
Yeah.
It could be the stories of the people who watched Teletext and used it for interesting things, like the Teletext holidays that they went on.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think that the crux of it is it's sort of like most things with retro and things like that, which is sort of like the sphere that I come from. Yeah, well, it's what I tend to wrap myself up in. I don't know anything about anything, to be fair, but there's a lot of people that passionately do. But there's a lot of stories on that sort of thing that have been done and revisited, and people do try their best to put their spin on things and things like that. So that's why when we did Teletext, yes, it's very niche, and there's people that would perhaps not be into it as much or whatever. But it was just nice to cover fresh ground and nice to speak to people that were genuinely interested in sharing their stories. And it's been a real pleasure from start to finish, and you never know. The Teletext 60, they might be, it might not be us, and they might be clipping a lot of our Teletext 50 stuff, and going, oh, these people did this 10 years ago. Because we've got to remember, hats off to Simon Rawls, who did Teletext 40. And he did the Teletext 40, which is something that we got involved with when we were young Teletext stars. We had his Teletext TF editor to work with, and as each generation goes along, the mantle's picked up by someone, and then the baton's passed on to someone else. And I believe that Teletext was being used at an EMF concert or something like that. So it's not just us that's doing it. It's you've got your parallel universes of other people doing it as well, which is great. And I just really enjoy doing it. So it's people need to go out there and listen to it for just so that they have and they know everything about teletexting, but and that's it. They can put it away.
Like you say, even if you're not a massive fan of teletext, we hope that you will be interested in the story that's being told here. Well, it's a whirlwind sort of story.
It's of people. It's their experiences. Whether you're a casual and you're just interested in journalism, or you're just interested in people's stories, there's a part in there. There's sort of like a witch's mark in the whole thing about the death of Diana, which comes up a couple of times for two different people, and you can see how people, the real human effect on a massive news event happens, and how that affects people, and how important the teletext medium then was, and how quickly it had to adapt, because it couldn't have anything joyous on it, which was then people going through and just trying to change everything and try and tone it down, because people were getting triggered because something looked a little bit too happy a bit too soon, and things like that, and the enormous stress that put on people as well. So there's a lot of interesting things in there.
I just would say go out and listen to it, because we're not going to give any more spoilers. Just to say, a couple of people that we've not mentioned much. We've got Nathan Dane in there, and we've got Jason Robertson, who are bastions of the modern teletext sort of artisan revival in terms of teletext recovery, which, well, actually, both of those guys are quite famous, aren't they? Now, because they've both been on numerous news and radio articles. Peter Kwan is not in this documentary. Unfortunately, we've not interviewed him, have we?
No, we haven't yet. But we've been trying. He said he was going to do something, but he's very busy, and he's not managed to do that. But he's got so many other interests.
But you mentioned Simon Rawls, and that this is not a comprehensive documentary, but I feel like we've hit a lot of the points, because if it were comprehensive, we would have people like Peter Kwan and
Yes.
Simon Rolls on
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
But
And
there are
Alistair Buxton as well. If we
yeah,
could, yeah,
well,
yeah.
yeah, but it was a very difficult thing to get this down to 1 hour and 50, and for everybody to tell the story sort of coherently. So yeah, maybe Teletext 60, those guys will be in, but I'm trying to think of anybody else who deserves a name check, even though they're not in it specifically.
Oh, well, there's plenty of people that do. I mean, you've got Miss Chris that would, you know,
Gree,
who he champions a lot of the teletext art as well. And I think actually through your intervention and some of mine as well, I think, you know, I think a lot of he's an artist basically. He curates an art pack and he does a lot of different disciplines. So like you've got something called ANSI and all that, all different color disciplines and things like that. But he features an awful lot of teletext now, which is probably down to him seeking out teletext artists, which there are many of now in that community there. And I bring him up because you know, it's Canada, that's North America. You know, so people are giving a shit about it over there, which is amazing. There's plenty of other people we could talk about as well, like the teletext stars that we you know, Andy Jenkinson, Jellica.
The artists,
yeah, the artists,
absolutely.
Yeah.
We you know what? I've got enough
Yes.
material to do, and actually, people have recorded some special bits for things like that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, maybe that's a project for me in the future.
Yes, no, definitely. Oh, I'd love to help you with that as well. You take the lead on that, being the art man, and then yeah, I can do some bits and bobs and twiddly dees and things like that with it. So that'd be really good. But
Twiddle a few knobs on your technology that you've got over there.
yes,
in
have
the,
a play with the old synthesizer and
in
things
the
like that. now.
studio. Yeah,
I'd love to do that actually, because you know, I'd love to know what these teletext pages sound like. You know, and that is a project, isn't it? Well, I could get the old Volca bass out and the Moog and things like that, and just have a little tinker and see what these things should sound like, and have the original artist go, no, it doesn't sound like that at all.
The general synopsis at 1800, 350 miles west of Fitzroy, 986. Expected island, 983, 1800 Wednesday.
So yeah,
right.
good.
So yeah, I think that proves that teletext, there's so many creative directions you can go with it, but this is more of a sort of straight-laced documentary, I would
Yes.
say. Yeah, like I said, you can be very proud with the effort you've put into that.
Oh,
And
thank you, man.
well, I'm sure that the people out there listening, the link is down in the description. You can download it now to your iPad or whatever, you know, or you can just listen to it when you're on the move, on your morning run. I think it's a wonderful listen.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, that's it. You've got to download it now. Podcast platform of choice. It will appear up on YouTube as well if you're mad enough to look at a still screen. I mean, God, why would you want to do that? But
Oh,
you know,
well,
people do.
I might throw some clips up there. I might.
Yeah.
I see what I can do with that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. We'll yeah, that'd be a good idea actually, to do a clippy version, and then that would yeah, that's very much something you can do, and that's going to be on your channel, isn't it? Is that right?
Well, I've yet to start on it, so
Right.
maybe not.
Yeah, that's it. Now, well,
Right, yeah. So thank you very much for joining us on this launch party. We haven't had any cake or anything like that. We're not wearing formal gear, but that's sort of the documentary that Teletext 50 is. It's just sort of laid back, easygoing, nice listen for you, I would say.
quite moving as well, actually. I was quite
Yeah.
moved by it. It's you know, really good choice of music, good choice of clips and things like that. You know, and yeah, just really can't keep saying it's really great, but it is really great.
It's really great, isn't it? Yeah, it's a fantastic.
Marking my own homework there, but yeah, it's all right.
Yeah,
mate. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we need to get somebody to come in, celebrity, to say, like Tony Blackburn, to come in and say, listen to Teletext 50 now on the internet.
Well, we could pay for Chuck Schwersky to say it.
How much?
I
Oh,
don't know how
forget
much
it.
he'd be, but I think he would.
He has nothing to do with the teletext, though, has he?
No, I'm Chuck Swirsky.
And I've never heard of
I've never
teletext.
heard of teletext, and nor have you. So come along and listen to this, and then you'll know all about it. And I'm not a freaking liberal. That's it. And yeah, he would sort of like not entertain that one. It's I tried getting him for the for a podcast.
Max
but,
Headroom thing.
he said, "With respect, I decline."
Yeah, I can understand that. He probably gets so many emails and things and
Yeah,
messages about the Max Headroom thing, and he's done his one interview for it. So
yeah, he's moved on.
yeah, that's enough for people, I think.
No, that's fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, that's good. Well, Dan, I think we shall say keep it blocky.
And Kayanara,
Kayanara,
but it's
yeah.
not Kayanara because they're going to go straight over and download the podcast and listen to it.
Well, this is it. This is it. Well, we always hope for that. And no, it's really good. If you only do two things, go out, enjoy your life, and then go and download the podcast and have a listen to it
At the same time.
at the same time. Yeah, that's it.
So I've been Dan, and this has been Mr. Bite High No Limit himself, Carlos Astral.
That's it. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.